Hi, everyone. We've set up this Being an Engineer podcast as an industry knowledge repository, if you will. We hope it'll be a tool where engineers can learn about and connect with other companies, technologies, people, resources, and opportunities. So make some connections and enjoy the show.
And I was like, Dad, I don't know if I have what it takes to do this. This is hard. This is a lot of work. I'm trying to juggle it all. And I don't know if this is meant for me. And he was like, listen, you're going to get through this. And at the end of the day, you're going to have that degree and you're going to hang it up on your wall and you are going to be an engineer and nobody can take that away from you.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Being an Engineer podcast. Today we are talking with Sarah Bilger, who has over 7 years of experience in mechanical engineering and holds a Bachelor of Science in energy engineering. Some of the tools Sarah has developed over the years include managing multiple complex projects simultaneously, working as part of a team, and time management and organizational skills. She's also passionate about helping others pursue a career in STEM and advocating for inclusion and representation of women in the industry. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
All right. So, first question, same one I ask everyone. What made you decide to become an engineer?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think for me specifically, I always was an engineer to some degree, but it was really a matter of recognizing that and seeing how my qualities and traits made me a good example of someone who should pursue engineering as a career. So I think many engineers, we're good at math and science. That's what we're going through school and we're hearing you're good at math and science. You should, pursue something that has to do with that. And it was actually my grandfather who had said, you should be an engineer. You're really into math and science. You need to go into engineering. And probably that was about ninth grade or so. And he was very into the news and reading newspaper articles. And he had said, our future needs people to be engineers. We need people to pursue this career. And I think you would be great for it. And there's so much technology and innovations going on that we're going to need more people who are into the things that you're into to go out and do that. And I think that's really, ultimately what made me want to professionally pursue being an engineer. But yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Were you into building things at all when you were growing up as well?
Not so much, I would say, hands-on building things, but really problem solving. And I had a very high attention to detail. I think for me, it was a lot more creativity and drawing, that I enjoyed more. Really kind of expressing that, very fine details and looking at things differently, being into science and just naturally, I think, being gifted in math.
Yeah. That's the great thing about receiving an education in engineering, I think, is it helps you learn how to problem solve, right? And once you kind of have that framework for yourself of problem solving, it's almost unlimited what you can do with that background and training.
Yeah. And I think for me specifically, it was a little bit more difficult. So having that determination and resiliency and, wanting to continuously pursue it also made me better overall, now with projects and just, again, problem solving and getting the work done. I'm not afraid to fail at something. I'm not afraid to continue to figure out how can we make this better. And I think that was something that I really had to be okay with and build my confidence while I was in college.
Yeah, we have a sign actually in the hallway here at Pipeline that says persistence beats brilliance. And I'm not saying that you're not brilliant, Sarah. I'm sure you are. But 9 times out of 10, what I've seen is that the engineers who really have that tenacity, who are willing to spend the time to keep banging their head against that problem. They're the ones that figure it out, not necessarily the smartest, quote unquote, smartest engineers, whatever that even means.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, you work at a company called IPS, which is in the, I don't even know if I'm categorizing it quite right, the construction industry, which is not my industry, so please forgive me if I mess up this description. I think what IPS does is develop commercial buildings with complex infrastructure. Is that more or less what you folks do?
So IPS stands for Integrated Project Services, and it's a consulting service that includes architectural, engineering, project controls, construction management, and CGMP practices and compliance services. So we're really kind of this all-encompassing group, and we mainly focus on assisting clients with developing and manufacturing life-impacting products. And it's mostly in the biotechnical and pharmaceutical markets.
Okay. And these are buildings that you're constructing, right? Developing, like large facilities.
Yeah, most of the time they are large projects that we're working on and designing and then ultimately constructing as well. It's a full encompassing service.
Got it. Okay. So these are big, long projects, not something that's happening in a few months.
Yeah. Yeah, most of them are very large projects. We are now actually part of the Berkshire Hathaway company, and we have well over 3,000 employees, 45 different offices, over 17 different countries. And it's a big company.
Did you start your career there?
I did. I actually pivoted and switched. I had moved to South Carolina from our headquarters, which is in Pennsylvania. And at that time, I was working remotely, but it wasn't something that I could pursue as a full-time employee. And then with COVID happening and things adjusting to having remote workers, I had switched back over after a while. So
got it.
I'm what they call a boomerang in the company.
Wonderful. All right. I was thinking about the process that must be involved in constructing a large facility, right? Especially with all the complexity of the infrastructure and the, routing electrical and plumbing and all of that stuff. And then I was thinking about the projects we do here, which is mostly custom equipment that we'll build. Sometimes it's like benchtop size, sometimes the standalone automation cell. And even with these projects that we take on, which are usually, anywhere from like 2 to 10 months, right? Generally, it's a lot of work to plan these out and figure out what the schedule is going to be and the budget, and then to execute all of that stuff. And what you folks are doing is like exponentially bigger than that. What is the process like for an architectural development, a construction project like this? Is it kind of the same process as you might see in like smaller engineering projects, just more of everything, or do you have very specialized tools that you use?
Yeah, I would say it's just a larger scale. Me specifically, I work in the mechanical department, HVAC engineering. So there are a lot of different departments, a lot of different people, a lot of different factors that all tie into these projects. And I'm more so specifically focusing on, generating different calculations for our room loads, all the heating and cooling calculations, pump head calculations. We're using software like Revit and CAD. We have spreadsheets that we utilize and other computer-based software and programs. And me specifically, I'm laying out our ductwork and making sure that I'm not clashing with our electrical and our plumbing and, looking at where our architects have set walls and where our structural team has beams and things like that. Like we are all coordinating within mostly, I would say, Revit models and incorporating that, making sure we're refreshing it, making sure we're reloading it. If I'm dropping in mechanical equipment, I'm letting them know, hey, this is new. We've shifted it over 10 feet, or hey, like your lighting is clashing with my returned ducks and stuff. So it's a lot of coordination, but there's a lot of team members, and we're all kind of rechecking and having systems in place, using a lot of clash detection to make sure that we're not having things where they shouldn't be, and there's not two things in multiple locations, and really taking the time to coordinate that, having a lot of internal meetings, having a lot of meetings with clients. It's just, I think, overall, like a more extensive timeline and constructability, I would say, than smaller scale projects.
Okay. What is the split like between the design portion and the build portion? I think of, again, what we do, and I don't know, maybe on average, they're about equal. You spend 50% of the time designing and 50% building. Is it roughly the same in your industry, or is it very different?
I'm not entirely sure on that process. And I mean, I have only been with the company for I say a short period of time, but there has been people that have been there longer. But I mean, there will be projects that we have completed design, and I'm sure they are still some of them being constructed to some extent, or a lot of the times we're consulting a company and allowing them to see maybe what it would cost or what it would look like or what that timeline would look like, and then they get placed on hold. So it's a lot of different, depending on the client's needs, depending on what they want specifically. I think that also adjusts the timeline.
Is the design portion of a project, is that usually measured in years for the stuff that you work on?
I guess some of them, like I would say, have been, like years.
Depends on the project, maybe a little bit, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I'll take a real quick break here and share with the listeners that teampipeline.us is where you can learn more about how we help medical device and other product engineering or manufacturing teams develop turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines to characterize, inspect, assemble, manufacture, and perform verification testing on your devices. Today, we are speaking with Sarah Bilger. So, Sarah, you're an advocate for women in STEM. What are some of the problems that you observe that your male counterparts may not even realize are problems?
Yeah. And I guess I wouldn't like to even call them problems. It is just, I think sometimes a lack of just communication between different groups of people. And, specifically for women, I think we are not typically seen in the role of being an engineer. So I think a lot of the times as a female in engineering, I have walked into a room and there are not people that look like me. And I know that there are, different situations that is going on, but going into college, wanting to pursue engineering, I don't think the magnitude of it had really set into me. I didn't really know what it was like to be an engineer before that. And so I had never been in an engineering office. I had never, known anybody that was an engineer. I wasn't familiar with what it was going to be like. So I was very surprised going into my first engineering class and being one of very few women in that room. And so I think you're kind of automatically standing out. You're automatically different than a lot of people that are in that room. And I feel like in a way, sometimes you feel like you have to prove yourself to be deserving of that spot to sit in there. And I feel like there's just a lot of confidence building that you have to go through and a lot of self-reflection on who you are as a person and why you want to pursue this career, because it is hard to be that person in the room where nobody else looks like you and you do feel kind of left out automatically. And not that like maybe any of those men are in there thinking that, like maybe they're, not even noticing or not even acknowledging it, but you, I think, are thinking it the hardest because you are aware of it. You're very hyper aware of the fact that you are the only person sometimes in the room that is a female. And I think a lot of the times it might also be misunderstanding that, an engineer can look and act different, and we don't have to fit into this stereotype of what it means to be an engineer necessarily. And I think subconsciously there might be some, bias going on of like what a woman is capable of, or because you haven't seen somebody in this profession doing the work that looks like that. I think it can be sort of hard to envision that. Like if you close your eyes and, you tell a group of 100 people, or you tell them to close their eyes and you say like, okay, imagine an engineer just walked into the room. They're initially not going to think me. I'm not going to think me. And I think it's just kind of, placing yourself in that mindset and saying like, what does it truly mean to be an engineer, and what does that person look like? I think it's more so personality traits. It's more so, the way that you like to learn, the way that you are as a professional. I think those things factor in more of what an engineer is. And even, using language like saying, guys, like you're in a meeting and, you might be like, all right, guys, like, let's go, like, let's get together. Some people might take offense to that you are almost generalizing the group. I mean, I come from up north, so you guys, like guys, that's very common slang use of words. But when, you're sitting in that room and you are the only girl, woman, female, and you're hearing like, all right, guys, like, let's go over here. It might not be as encouraging or reinforcing to want to participate when you do feel like you're not being included. And I think that's just sort of, trying to like be aware of it, but also not overcompensating for it. Cause like I've also been in meetings that people have said, oh, you guys. And then they're like, oh, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, like everybody, all of you. And they try to like over correct themselves. And then I think like that draws more attention. So I think it's just like, understanding that like we don't have to fit this certain mold, or we don't have to, be a specific person in order to be an engineer, and really kind of then collectively like demonstrating that to our children as well, and like being able to pass that down and let them see like anything is possible. Because I think we need to sometimes see that other people are doing something that we might think is unattainable or not possible in order for us to believe that it is. And I think naturally men have just been engineers longer, so they have had a greater possibility of that being what it means to be an engineer and fit that type.
Sure. Yeah. You mentioned how tough it was going through school. You walked into your first class and kind of the reality of the situation hit you. What was the process like getting through that? Were there specific incidents that occurred that made you think to yourself, okay, yeah, I can do this, and this is how I get past it? Or was it just kind of a gradual thing that, happened over time, and maybe it still is happening? I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, a little bit uniquely, I was mostly raised by my dad. My mom had passed when I was very young. So I think having that, I guess, upbringing of mostly having my dad and him being like, very work driven and willing to kind of like allow me to not take any BS, if you will. I think his like determination and his confidence kind of like allowed me to have the permission to have that as well. And I think that was sort of ingrained in me. Like, look, I'm here too. I'm doing the same coursework. I'm doing the same classes. I'm, in the same position you are, like we both got here. We're both doing this, and I have every right to be here as well. And I do specifically remember calling him one time though, and I was like, Dad, like, I don't know if I have what it takes to do this. This is hard. Like, this is a lot of work. Like, I'm trying to juggle it all, and I don't know if this is like meant for me. And he was like, listen, you're going to get through this. And at the end of the day, you're going to have that degree and you're going to hang it up on your wall and you are going to be an engineer and nobody can take that away from you. And I think it was really just kind of like getting that, I'm trying to think of a word for it, but like reassurance that like I can do this and that it was okay for me to pursue this, even if it was going to be difficult. And having somebody that believed that I could do it, I think really helped.
That's a big deal. I had a similar experience when I was, I don't know, maybe a sophomore or a junior. I'd just taken a test and I'd done horribly on it, and I was feeling overwhelmed. Like, this is so hard, this coursework. I am not your quintessential engineer that just gets all the formulas and can whip out the physics and the fluid dynamics. School was hard for me. So anyway, I remember this one instance when I had done poorly on a test. I was feeling overwhelmed, and I remembered this guy I grew up with. One of a friend of mine, his dad was an engineer, and he had told me before I went off to school. He said, "Hey, the school is really hard. So don't let that discourage you. Just know that once you finish, like, the actual job of being an engineer is not as hard as the schooling is. So just get through the schooling. You'll be okay." And at the time I was like, okay, whatever, I don't know why you're telling me this, but sure. Okay. And then I had that situation where I was almost like, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I can't do it. And I remembered what he said, and it was like, oh yeah, okay, this is what he was talking about. Okay, just push through it and it'll all be okay. And it was. So having those words of reassurance from people who have been there, done that, or, have some wisdom to share, that's a really big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of the times it is sort of, if you don't have that person kind of giving you that confidence, if you don't see it being possible for you, it is very easy. I mean, it's easy to give up. It's very easy to just be like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, let's throw in the towel. I tried. But it's hard to know that you might fail a class. It's hard to know that, you're not going to get something right away. It's hard to put yourself through that and really have to push yourself and challenge yourself in order to get something that you want. It's not an easy route. For some people, maybe, classes are a lot easier and they're, breezing right through it. But, I think like, going back to that quote that you have on the wall, it's really just like consistently trying to push and, continue to go down that route if that's what you want. I think engineering is a long career. A lot of professions, you really have to work consistently going towards one main objective, and you're leading yourself down that road, and you have to continuously, I think, be asking, why you want to do this and what really motivates you to continue to do it.
Going back to women in STEM specifically, if you could write one thing on a billboard that millions of other engineers were going to see, what do you think it would be?
Yeah, this question I think is really hard to just choose. Again, like, there's so many different things that you can say.
How about what's one of the things that you would put up there?
I think, I'll bring up this story. My husband showed me this video the other day, and he was like, oh, like, you have to watch this video. Like, I don't know if you saw it before, but it's this box, and it had all these shapes kind of cut out on the top of it. And they start out with a cube, and they're like, okay, like, what shape does the cube fit in? And of course you're like, oh, the square, like I'm going to put the cube through the square. And then like, they're like, okay, we have a cylinder. What shape does the cylinder fit in? And you're like, oh, the circle, like put it in the circle. And he puts it in the square. And you're like, why in the world would you put it in the square? Like it's supposed to go in the circle. And he continues with like all these little wooden, pieces, and he's putting them in the square, and they're, triangle and an arch, and they're all perfectly cut out. Obviously probably an engineer put this together, and they're all perfectly fitting into the square that's on this box. And I think, like that really kind of hits for this, and it could just be like, like if a cylinder can fit through a square, then like you can be an engineer.
I like that analogy. That's fun. Yeah.
I think just like rethinking like what's possible and understanding like it can be multiple different solutions to problems.
Yeah. Okay. All right. My next question here, if this is too personal or you don't feel like talking about this, totally fine. Just tell me to shut up and we'll move on to the next one. But I'm curious about how having kids changed your professional career. And as I was writing this question, I thought to myself, if Sarah was a man, would I ask her this question? And I think what happened for me was, this is terrible. I will freely admit this. Like my initial assumption was like, oh, the women stay home and take care of the kids. So obviously when you have kids, that changes things a lot. But of course, that's just not true, right? I mean, it is for some people, but certainly not for everyone. So if you're willing, would you be comfortable talking about what that transition was like?
Yeah. I mean, I love that you acknowledge that, because I think it is true. I think a lot of times, when a man will have a baby, I've even seen it like in the workplace or, just in the profession or other professions as well. Nobody really bats an eye if he's going to stay at work or not. It's never a question. It's never really like, oh, like, are you going to stay home with the kids now? And that was something that I was sort of kind of like hit with or faced, like when I was pregnant with our first, like, oh, okay, are you going to stay home for a couple of years? Or, oh, like, what does this look like for you now? And I mean, mind you, motherhood has changed me completely. But when I was pregnant with my first, I was like, oh, heck yeah, like I'm coming straight back to work. Like it's going to be no problem. I am just going to continue doing exactly what I'm doing, but we're going to have a baby. And anybody that has had children knows that you can't just plop a baby into your life and things are going to be the same. But I was still very determined to return back to my career and pursue being an engineer, because this is something that like I feel passionate about. And I feel like if I'm not willing to continue to be an engineer while also being a mother, then who is? And we need to have that representation. I think, there are products out there that engineers are making for mothers. And if we don't have mothers being the engineers that are creating those products, then we're not really going to be able to have that representation and that, creativity behind what it takes to make those items. And, it really is like a very small portion of engineers in general that are female. And statistically, like I don't even know what the facts are for how many mothers are engineers. I don't know if anybody's ever conducted that, if anybody's like really kind of, created that, but I'm sure it's drastically lower. And even like once you get to a certain age, like how many years are you staying in there, and then as you have more kids, what are the chances that a mom of 2 kids, 3 kids, 4 kids is, still pursuing that career? And I think it's important for us to continue to advocate and fight for that and see what it's like to be able to juggle all of that so we can see what that work-life balance really looks like and how we can accommodate people that have children, not just for women, parents as well. I think parents want to be with their children. They want to be able to attend field trips and after school activities and do all those things. And as they get older, participate in all of that. And in general, kids get sick a lot when they're young. You have to have, proper childcare. And, there's a lot that kind of really goes into it. I mean, like you could really focus a whole episode on what is going on with just careers in general and childcare.
For sure.
So,
yeah.
But yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge, like, would I ask this question if I was a male? Like, would you be, how do you do it all? Like, you have kids and a career? What? Like, I think it's really sort of like one of those things where it's like nobody asked my husband that, and he's an engineer as well. Like, nobody kind of questioned like, oh, like, how long are you going to take off? Like, what does this mean? Like, what do you need? Like, what is this going to look like?
Yeah, it's totally not fair.
Yeah. It's a lot sometimes to be like having to, again, like, it's just, you feel like you have to then too, like, almost like overperform, like, oh, I have to like, prove that like I'm supposed to be here too, and that I can like do it all. Whereas I think even, somebody with kids or without kids doesn't have that pool.
Do you think that has strengthened your resolve or in some ways made you an even stronger person, just knowing that you kind of have to put up with some of that nonsense and get through it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it definitely kind of like woke me up to just like life outside of my own little bubble. I think I'm more passionate about kind of trying to understand different cultures or different environments, different people's backgrounds, and really see like where they're coming from. Because I think a lot of times we do just make assumptions based on our own personal experiences. And so like being pre-kids and after kids, I kind of look at myself like, oh my goodness, like I can't believe I ever said something like that about like somebody that had kids, and like now I'm in that position. And so like having that complete, like I'm still the same person, but I'm in a whole different experience, and having that happen, staying in the same career path, like staying in the same environment, other than that being a different factor, it's kind of like allowed me to see that other people have different experiences, and we have to kind of be aware of that. Yeah.
The context of our lives really changes our perspectives, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me switch gears a little bit here. You have been in the past involved in a variety of volunteer work. I'm curious about how that got started. What were the motivating factors, and why did you continue with it for whatever period of time that was?
Yeah, I mean, in college, I was involved with a lot of different activities and stuff. I think just naturally, I'm a social person. I like to kind of form groups and communities and really just get to know other people in general. And I guess my mom, who had passed, like I said, she passed from cancer. And so I think that kind of helped me find a community. Like the one that I was involved with specifically in college was for pediatric cancer, and really like helping families in that sense. And I think, like being a family that was affected by cancer, I wanted to give back and kind of like help out in that sense. And I felt connected to it in a way because I had a experience that I felt, was connecting to that. But again, like it's a different now, like I said, like, having kids, like yes, I lost a mother, but losing a child, I feel a whole different perspective of now as a parent myself. And to know though that there's these college kids who majority of the time, none of them have kids, and they are, passionately involved with helping families that have been experiencing this. It's just like awesome to see, and something that like I always felt kind of called to be a part of, and like want to be around other people and just big groups and experiences.
So, Sarah, you mentioned in your LinkedIn profile that you have developed excellent time management and organizational skills. Can you share a few pro tips that you have with us for time management and or organization?
Sure. Yeah. I am a huge fan of time blocking. If you don't know what that is basically just kind of taking chunks of time and saying during this time, I am specifically working on these tasks. So kind of breaking up your day in general. If you do the same tasks or, working on multiple different projects, you're allocating from 9 to 10, I'm working on this project. From 10 to 11, I'm working on this project. Or, if you're only on one project, you're splitting it up to multiple different tasks. You're working on drawings, you're working on duck layout, you're working on specs. You're splitting it up into your tasks and designating, a specific time for that period, and also time tracking. So maybe if you don't even know where to start, oh, what am I blocking off all my time? You can track what am I actually doing with my time and how am I utilizing my time? Because I think a lot of the times we have more time than we think that we do. And you could be kind of trailing off or getting lost in different tasks or spending more time than you need to on something that might not need to take as long as it does, and kind of just efficiently making your own, I would say structure of how you're going to do something and then perfecting it and just kind of getting better as you go by. Maybe, you have a track of lessons learned, or if I need to do this again, I'm going to, make sure I start with this instead of setting it up a different way, so that you can kind of learn from that experience and say why it took you that long, or how you could kind of make it be more efficient of a process. And then in general, I think I've always just been very, very organized. I like to keep things in very specific folders and very specific files. I'm usually kind of dating things certain ways, but also trying to think of it as if somebody else needed to take over this project, or if somebody else needed to look at this and I wasn't there, or maybe it's coming back to it years later, or, somebody else is looking at it. A lot of times engineers, you're passing it off to other people. They need to be able to evaluate it and look at it. So kind of approach it in a way of, if somebody else was looking at it, or if I wasn't familiar with the project, what would I need to know about this? And how can I structure it to be more seamless of a presentation that somebody else that doesn't know about the project can understand. Because if you're coming into a project folder that is just all thrown together, I think we all know what kind of that's and you're yo, what did you do here? Why is it all over the place? Where do I even start? And so I think making it easy for somebody else to pick it up if you're not the person there, and kind of saying that's how you're going to organize your projects is a lot easier for you to then have a system to structure, and then a lot easier for somebody else to comprehend if they're looking at it. And I've always also been a very paper planner of a person. I have my actual planner that I thoroughly write down, dates for things, deadlines for things, appointments. I think, being a mom too, that really helps structure what day is what for the kids, or when this is, when that is, and marking those things off on your calendar and making people aware of those appointments and things. I love school supplies growing up. I love office supplies now.
Wow, you're such a nerd,
new
Sarah.
Paper. A good quality pen.
Oh, there you go. Well, I really like the mindset that you have of if someone else was going to take over this project, what would I do to keep everything organized? And then just working like that, even if no one else is going to take over. That's a great strategy. And time blocking, another excellent one. I have my calendar pretty much every day is full of stuff. And you might look at it and think, wow, he's really, really busy, when in reality, I'm not really much more busy than anyone else. I just like to fill out the calendar so I know exactly what I'm working on at what time. Anyway, great suggestions. Love both of those. Last question here, and then I think we'll wrap it up. Specifically within the context of your role as an engineer, what is one thing that frustrates you, and conversely, one thing that brings you joy?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just had a very specific example of what frustrates me, but a lot of the times it's troubleshooting or, dealing with this software or programs that are supposed to be really awesome, amazing tools. And for the most part, they are, but when they aren't doing what you want it to do, or if you're not putting in, like they say, like garbage in, garbage out, like if you're not putting in the correct numbers or, utilizing it in the best way that it needs to be, you're not going, like you can't just put in random numbers and it's going to give you what you need. You need to intuitively be working together with it and sometimes back checking a lot of these calculations that some of these projects are giving us. Like we just had energy analysis that we were working on and it was kind of like automatically populating some numbers. And we were like trying to figure out like, well, why did it auto populate it here for this reason and not over here? And what is it thinking that we're trying to tell it that it's doing this? Because we don't want it to do that. We want it to show something differently. And because we know what those answers are supposed to look like, because we know what the output is supposed to be, we can kind of like interpret it. But if you don't know, a general ballpark of what you're supposed to be getting, you can be putting in, bad information and it's going to give you an incorrect answer to what you want to truly solve. So I think really like navigating some of this technology and some of the software. And I feel like that's going to continuously be something that we are always doing, especially with like more technology, more things that come out. We have to, look at it and say like, is it doing what we truly want it to do? And so I think that's like the biggest frustration that I have.
Well, great. Sarah, is there anything else that we haven't hit on that you'd like to talk about before we sign off here?
Did you ask like that full question?
I wasn't sure
what part
if you
brings you joy?
Intentionally, just pass that one over or not. So I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah, the second part was.
I was just like reading through my notes, and I was like, yeah. So what really brings me joy too in a project is being able to present it in like a finished set. I think nothing's better than having complete drawing sets or, completing a project and having something that you can, successfully present to a client and be like, look at what I have. Like, look at what I've completed for you. Because I think that like sense of like accomplishment and finally wrapping something up, even if it's just, an issue set, it's not like the final set, but it's just, coming to a stopping point, like hitting a mile mark, really just completing like one specific task. I think that brings me a lot of joy to be able to see, even if it's little baby steps and maybe you're making a list of things in your task box that like, you're just taking those little tiny baby steps, like even just sending an email, like making sure that you're accomplishing something. I think that brings me a lot of joy, just knowing like, okay, like I didn't get done, maybe this or maybe this like stalled or, took longer than expected, but at least I kind of like did this one thing and I feel really good about it. And being able to like be proud of the work that you're presenting, I think brings me joy.
That's great. As you were talking about having all the project documents finished and packaged together, ready to hand over to a customer, I thought about drawings, mechanical drawings, right, to get something fabricated. And a lot of engineers don't love doing the documentation side of engineering. And I would include myself in that camp generally. But there is something oddly satisfying about like having this drawing package and being able to just give it to someone and have that drawing package, that documentation so complete and so thorough and so clear that someone else who knows nothing about the project can go off and build this thing, down to the 1,000th of an inch, at least for what we do, and send it back. That to me it brings me some joy.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, like when I start out with a complete blank floor plan And then here I am putting in all of this ductwork and making sure all the elbows and the takeoffs and all the connections to the equipment and everything slowly just starts to piece together. And maybe you have like a really confined space too that you have to, meet. Like, hey, like we only have 3 feet to work with here or something like that. And being able to be like, hey, I figured it out and I put all that in there and look at how cool it looks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, Sarah, I think we'll wrap it up here. Now, you have your own podcast, and the question I usually ask people at the end of these is how can others get a hold of you? So if you want to share something there, maybe it's just LinkedIn or whatever, but also tell us a little bit about your podcast and where listeners can go to experience that.
Yeah. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, you should be able to find mine, which is called Entering Motherhood. And it really is a journey of me kind of navigating motherhood and what that has looked like and what I have learned, about myself, about, the process in general and really just, uncovering everything that you go through and becoming a parent in general. But, specifically, I feel like it was geared towards, being a mom, but I think it's very practical for all parents in general, just like navigating what it means to become a parent.
Awesome.
So you can find me there. LinkedIn as well. I'm on LinkedIn, Sarah Marie Bilger. The website for the podcast is enteringmotherhood.com, or I am on Instagram as well.
Terrific. That's wonderful. All right. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. Best of luck both with the career and the podcast. And I just really appreciate you sharing your experience with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Aaron Moncur, founder of Pipeline Design and Engineering. If you liked what you heard today, please share the episode. To learn how your team can leverage our team's expertise developing turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines, and with product design, visit us at teampipeline.us. Thanks for listening.